Good morning and welcome to all of our speakers and guests. This webinar is the second of a four-part series this Women's Month. The women of our country are saying we are done with waiting in line, begging bowl in hand and asking for our cup to be filled with philosophy and platitudes. Women are saying anything we do now will be focused on making urgent the reality of equitable economic access with specific targets, proper monitoring, and tangible outcomes. This economy and all its key holders are being put on notice. Today's discussion pivots around how women can achieve greater economic decision-making. And our speakers hail from across South African society, and I know that we will have a rich and productive session. Before I introduce them to you, let's listen to how our subject today has been impacting women.
I started off in corporate in 2019 March, and I had just come from school. I made a decision on a recon that I did, which I had been sitting on doing for hours on end, working overtime, and I was called in for a council hearing. I was told that in this recon that I had been doing for some time and making decisions based on it, I had been trying to defraud the company. Being an A student in accounting, doing an accounting degree, I was really confident in what I was doing. I was confident in all the work, and from that day my self-esteem dropped. I was scared to make any kind of decisions because if I did, I would be reprimanded and humiliated in front of everyone. Even when I tried to make a decision, I was told that no, how dare I make that decision, or do I even know anything about accounting? And that just made me wonder if I actually am good enough to actually make any kind of decision making. It brought me into serious depression and serious anxiety, just making a decision maybe the day before and not be so scared to go to work the next day, have sleepless nights. And I eventually left the company due to my mental health being at risk and my health in total.
I was with this particular organization for a period of about two years, and the portfolio that I managed was on a national level, and it required me to manage a staff complement of about 20 odd people. And in most cases, those individuals were male, and they were a lot older than I was. And I often found that whenever we sat around the management table, I would table particular decisions that I believe would effectively grow my unit. And often enough, my decisions were never really taken into account. And I often found that they were overridden by my superiors. And when I questioned this boldly, I was often given very fickle answers. So I came to the conclusion that being young, being black, and being female was really, it worked against me in this context. I believe I was never really given a fair chance to have my decisions affected.
And I worked for a company where I found it was total boys' club. The males would have their meetings either during the break or on the balcony, and they would then come up with ideas or suggestions or make decisions. By the time we had our formal meeting, it was a done deal, without including any of the females, without asking our opinions, and we had to just abide by it. In my 50s, I worked at SAA, and there I found, even though I held a very strategic senior position as head of risk and then finally group treasurer, I was not respected for my position. I was ignored, and I was totally undermined when it came to certain meetings. I had to chair certain meetings, like our financial risk meeting, and whenever the meetings were set, I found that my male counterparts wanted to either change the meeting date or shorten it or cancel it. And I had to really be insistent to make sure that this happened. It's been a long-term struggle over the years in my career, and nothing's changed these days. I find that even though there's more women in senior positions, I am sure that they're also meeting these challenges when it comes to promotion or being recognized or acknowledged.
Listening to stories like those just absolutely makes my blood boil. And you can see a range of women, younger women, older women, women that are starting out in their careers, women who are quite advanced in their careers, and it is the same story. It is like we're singing from the same insidious hymn book. And for all of you joining us, whether on our live stream or on our Zoom call, thank you again for being part of this really important conversation. Let us not forget that it's happening under the auspices of our hosts, WoSA. So let me introduce you to WoSA if this is your first time hearing about it. And who better than Dorik Sithole, who is a communications practitioner, but also speaks for the Women of South Africa, a federation of women's organizations focused on actions advancing and elevating the status of women. Dorik?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Iman, for that introduction. And I'd like to say Happy Women's Day. I know we passed the holiday, but we continue to celebrate it as we go along. And so speaking to what the movement stands for, I just want to reiterate for those of us who are not familiar with the movement and how it started. It was kicked off on 21st of June when we wrote an open letter to the president, and we highlighted some demands in terms of the plight that women are facing in South Africa. And we stipulated some things like, the gender pay gap, and saying we need to ensure that it is criminalized for women to get less than men if you're working at the same level in terms of the job. But also speaking to having assets, women being given access to land, women being given resources like funding. People are running businesses, but they shut those businesses down as women because they don't have the resources to sustain their businesses. So just in terms of summarizing what we're about, we really want women to join this campaign because it's about economic emancipation. But also, once we get that, women will get to live life in their own terms. You run your own business, you get to call the shots, but you also get a seat on the table that allows you to speak out and your voice is heard. So I just wanted to highlight that, to say a seat on the table does not determine whether your voice is going to be heard. So we want women to be heard, and we want to be part of the whole process because the numbers speak for themselves. Even for some of us who are not good with maths, we've begun to memorize the numbers to say, hey, this does not look good. This picture does not look good. So I just wanted to remind all of us, all the women out there, if you have not signed the petition, go to the website womenofsouthafrica.org and be a part of the process. We're asking for practical solutions to be placed on the table, a barometer that's going to show us what is actually happening on the ground, hold people accountable. Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing in terms of including women? And if that's not happening, we get to go back and say, hello, this needs to change. And I'm happy with the response that we got from the president on his speech for Women's Day. Some of the key things he mentioned, the National Strategic Plan, the gender equality campaign that's going out there, generation equality. For me, we hear you, but now we want to see the practical solutions. We want to see it happening. And I think the stories that you've just played already speak volumes about the plight that women are facing. And I can understand, Iman, when you're saying your blood was boiling. My blood has been boiling for years. And I would like to see some change happening practically. So we need to stop talking and start implementing practical things that are going to be pleasing also to women, not just so that it's a facade, but so that it's a practical solution to the women of South Africa so we can participate equally as well.
Dorik, excellently and eloquently put. Thank you very much for that. As Dorik said, you can sign the petition on www.womenofsouthafrica.org. So now I want to introduce you to our team of panelists who, as I say, have been drawn from a range of South African society. Basani Maluleke is the CEO of African Bank. Dr. Natalie Skeepers is a governance, risk and compliance specialist. Lynette Magasa is the CEO of Boniswa Corporate Solutions. Mersha Andrews is many things, an activist, director at Trust for Community Outreach and Education with the Rural Women's Assembly. Hilebogile Tseladi Mitlwa Molakwani is an HR executive director and board member. We are really blessed to have a really solid range of women speaking on some of the issues you heard raised in those testimonials and what Dorik touched on. So in this first segment, we are going to focus on how women are being excluded from economic decision-making in all areas and what the impact of this exclusion is. And I think, Basani, I'm going to give you the ball first to take it and run with it. I know that as the CEO of African Bank, you're very tired of being referred to as the first Black woman CEO of a bank, so I'm not going to say that. But there's no doubt that you are a leader and a trailblazer, and you have this heavy task of turning around the fortunes of African Bank. You have years and years of experience in financial services. And in interviews that you've given, you say what contributes to your success is having a strong support structure. Have you always had that strong support structure in your leadership roles or in your path towards leadership?
Morning, Mon, and morning to everybody. I absolutely have. I've been very, very blessed. I was born into a family with a very big extended family. You know how it is, right? You end up having multiple fathers, multiple uncles, and so on. And on top of that, I then have a very strong base of siblings, each more ambitious than the one before. And as a result, we're all kind of trying to find our own path in the world, and as a result, create a very nice support structure. I think so I was born with a very good support structure, but what I also learned as I went along the path is the need to continually grow it. So it definitely wasn't going to be enough to rely on the privilege I was born into. It was really a question of who else along this journey actually supports and cheers for me. How do you recognize those people? How do you develop those relationships? How do you remain mindful of the importance of having a network that is there for you?
And I think you are an anomaly in that regard, because the majority of the stories that I hear are going in the opposite direction. We'll tease out some of the themes in terms of what empowers you to have a voice of authority and to not be blindsided by others that would seek to derail your objective and your purpose, as we've seen with many of us when we are sitting in decision-making positions. Dr. Natalie Skeepers, you are currently playing in the male-dominated spaces, typically male-dominated spaces of construction. You have been in your field for almost 2 decades now. You hold a PhD in engineering management. Have you ever borne the brunt of being discounted?
Yeah, I think, Iman, that also comes along with my strong personality and my character. So often women are told that they're aggressive or they're mean or something, but if a man had the same personality traits, you wouldn't get that same backlash. But I think in my case, I've done everything to educate myself, be well-rounded, well-spoken, doing all the things that you think would get you recognized and where you should be. Unfortunately, you still get into a boardroom or boardrooms, because I serve on a few boards, where I think males sometimes tend to think that you are there because of their kindness, or they've opened the door, they allow you to be, as the previous speaker said, leaning in or getting a seat at the table. But that's utter rubbish, because I know a lot of women in my space that will do a lot and will go to the ends of the earth to make sure that they have the right tick boxes or tick the right boxes. And yet, the statistics that was flighted earlier on, especially on the JSE listed companies, it's appalling. The clothes that we wear, I was just trying to think, how does this impact on me personally? Think of all the retail shopping shops that we go to. If you go and Google them and who's sitting as chairman of the board or as the CEO of the organization, it's all male. And yet we are the ones going to those shops and we're buying the clothes that men or males or these organizations decide what we're gonna wear and how we're gonna be participants in this economy. So back to my credentials, it is difficult, and I'm a very, very outspoken person, and I don't take no nonsense. If I don't like what's going on in the boardroom, if I don't like what's being said, I will raise my opinion, but it comes with a backlash. It comes with you being branded. It comes with you being marked. But I'm at a stage, and I think I'm at my age where I just don't care anymore, because I'm going to voice my opinion. I'm going to say what I want to say. And if people don't like me, it's fine. You know the saying that I'm not everybody's cup of tea, right? But why is it that a lot of people want to have coffee with you? Yeah, so that's my statement for saying I'm not your cup of tea, but you want to have coffee with me. So I must add value, or I must be bringing something to the table. So I think also what I want to add, us as women, we also have to start making room or creating opportunities and stop allowing our fellow male colleagues or people that we don't agree with pushing out other women. Right. So we need to create that platform. Thank you.
I will always say, Dr. Skeepers, that I would want you on my side in a fight for sure, especially especially one that happens in those sort of well-heeled halls and corridors. I want you on my side. Lynette, you know, your story also just warms my heart. I recall reading a piece where you were sharing how you once sold fish and chips at your grandmom's shop during your holiday. Well, I mean, you know, how different the picture is today, where you're heading your own firm, which operates not only in South Africa, but the rest of the continent. One of the things you're known for is having an inclusive approach with your employees. Did you always feel that inclusivity as you were working your way, you know, up various ladders till the point when you created your own?
Iman, yes, thank you so much. You know, I strongly believe in that. You know, I'm where I am today because of I've been blessed to work with such wonderful people, and so we've always had an open access, open plan system within our company, where whenever you make decision, you also involve everybody that has got to do with that decision. And that has actually taken us to different countries, and because we work as a team and everybody within the company understand that they have to be part of the puzzle. From the receptionist to the engineers, we've always worked together and understand that we have to make sure that we get confidence from our clients, more especially because, you know, in the telecommunication industry as well, there are very few women that are playing, particularly inside the core business, not just saying that you're supplying papers, but playing in the core business in terms of GSM or in the engineering part. We've always understood, I've always made sure that, you know, it takes time for the clients to sort of like believe in a woman's own organization. So in whatever that we do, we have to be more than, you know, to produce quality more than 100%. And so it has sort of like become a culture for us. But I must say, like what Basi mentioned, that, you know, from the president's speech, I was also quite excited to hear that there's going to be more inclusive for women. Because what I always find disturbing for me, especially, is that most of the venture capitalists, you know, it's difficult for women to get funding. And I don't know why. I think that it's sort of like a culture that venture capitalists, board sittings, most of those guys, they will always finance male organizations. And it also even goes even beyond that, that you find that people that sit in those boards as well, it's normally male organizations. So I think I'm quite excited to be part of this discussion, because I know that it will take a group of women like the ladies that I'm with, and also it takes joint effort to sort of like making change so that we can make change for everybody in South Africa and also in Africa in general. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you so much for that. And again, all of the themes that each of you are touching on, I want to tease out a little bit later on. We're already about 20 minutes in. Please keep your questions coming through on the chat, and I'll pose them to the panel once we've concluded the opening statements. We are at the moment just on a little slow jog. We're going to sprint towards the second and third segment so we can really share with others who are listening some of the things that we need to be focused on in terms of dismantling the structures that keep us in the places that we are right now, and what we can do to make sure that whatever promises are made from a policy perspective, like those that we hear from the president that he announced just a day before yesterday, or was it yesterday? I'm losing track of time. That those things actually come to fruition, because we already have a number of promises on the table. Mersha Andrews, I was reading what you said on the sidelines of a protest in February, where you said we need to have a plan for ourselves. What do we do when government does not deliver? One of the things you said as well was we must act much more politically independent. And I would suppose that includes helping people, women especially, access their own voice. In your estimation, for the demographic that you represent quite vocally, how loud is that voice in decision-making, whether at home or in the workplace today?
Well, I firstly thank you, and I'm pleased to be with these wonderful women that you've put me among. So thank you, sister. So I come from the other spectrum. I'm sure it's a spectrum that many of you may not be unfamiliar with. So I think ordinary women, poor women, and particularly those in rural areas, farm worker women that I'm very closely associated with, I mean, voice is almost invisible. Women's voices, their opinions, it's just not recognized, even in the household. So part of, I think, what we need to begin to tackle is this question, and I'll call it, it has a name, it's called patriarchy. And I think we need to deal with patriarchy. We need to deal with the systems that create entrenched patriarchy. It's very much alive. We also say sometimes we as women also perpetuate the norms, the social norms that we fight against. So in our own families, we often also act in a particular way. We also teach our daughters to behave in a particular way. And these are some of the things that I think we need to challenge. One of the critical issues for us has been the fact that, we've had this campaign in this country as well as in the rest of Africa, that we must have women's representation in government, in local communities, right through. A couple of years ago, we even campaigned for a woman's president. Now, I'm of the view that many of the women that we've put in parliament often don't take decisions that advance women's interests. And they act in the interests of the party or the patriarchal system that upholds them. And so if we really want to challenge society, if we want to ensure that the resources at municipal level or in a company is adequately made available to women's development, etc., then we must have women that will act in our interest. And when we don't have this combination of acting in our interest, we will continually have silences. The mask that we're wearing now to keep COVID away is a common mask, because we are masked in many, many different ways because of social norms, etc. And for poor women, they hardly make any decisions. You take big trade unions. Let me take the trade union of the nurses. You ask who's in the leadership. 80% of the members are women. Yet in the leadership of the trade union, it's not the women. You take the clothing and textile sector. Who is in the leadership? You take all these kinds of structures, and it's the same pattern that people are talking about. At the top end, you see that perpetuated at all levels of society. So I think we need to have an approach that goes beyond, that is all inclusive, that starts in how we deal with families, how we deal with communities, how we deal with organizations, so that it helps us to challenge power, male power at all these levels. Thank you.
And it's one of the reasons I'm so appreciative that we're having this dovetail discussion, which is talking not only about how we front face the market, how we front face our employees, or how we are an employee. It talks about the psychology of power that we bring with us to those roles. Because as you're pointing out, Moshe, that if we haven't got those things right and we feel disempowered out of the gate, that's going to result in a secondary disempowerment when it comes to us and decision making. And I think what's interesting, and we're going to raise later, is that a lot of studies show that women and their decision making styles are much more solution orientated. When you tell me that in these trade unions, with the majority of membership, which is women, yet the leadership is mostly male, that just beggars belief when you know that we can run things, according to the research, much better than our male counterparts can. Lebo, final comment on this segment to you, and as I've said, to all of our listeners and those who've dialed in. You've sat on the boards of listed companies, you've run HR for major corporations. Please share your experiences of the space and authority of women's voices where you operate.
Hi, Iman. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity. I am fortunate in a way that I've experienced the best or better of both, where 50% I was fully supported in my role, 50% I was not supported in my role. However, when it comes to decision making, especially in a corporate world, you find that we went through the time where the laws were eliminated. The laws that were discriminating against women were eliminated. The democratization has increased women in corporate. However, you are invited to the table, but your voice is not listened to. You're invited to the tables where seriously strategical things at some points or some organizations, they will be discussed at the golf, they will be discussed at the braai, they will be discussed at the rugby. And when it comes to your boardroom, you can tell that this has been discussed before. And then I've been in organization or corporate where I was seen as a human being, not as a human. I was seen as a professional. My color was not there, my age was not included, and my gender was not important. The importance was for me to bring in my competency, my professionalism to the boardroom. And I say that in those organizations where I was fully supported, where I was fully listened to, I was given an opportunity to talk. The solutions were inclusive, the decision makings were inclusive, and then it was for the greater and the better of the whole organizations and the employees. And I would like to say that where I was not supportive, there are other methods that I've used. I've started to say, I've been invited to the table. I'm not going to keep quiet. I will raise my voice. I will give my opinion. I was labeled as aggressive, and if I keep quiet, you are labeled as disengaged. I have to learn under very difficult circumstances to find a solution between being aggressive, between being disengaged, and to find a bottom line and survive. And through it all my career, what is important is do not let anyone changes you. Do not let the organization changes you. Be true to yourself, raise your opinion. And if you have to, I've worked harder than my counterparts. I always have to work and research more, whereas we'll all be sitting on the table and then we'll all be doing the same work. But as a woman, you always have to prove that you really know your work, you really know what you are referencing, and your facts are always up above everyone else. Thanks.
Well, that was an amazing harvest of perspectives from very different points of view. I mean, I suppose perspective and point of view is the same thing, but sharing what it feels like when the voices of women in our rural communities or in the sometimes excluded demographics need to be heard. What is the state of their being and their access to agency? Coming to the corporate scenarios where we have such a multiplicity of experiences, some positive and some insidious and negative. I think it behoves us now then to use some of these and move into the second segment, which is around access to decision making, the challenges and the solutions. I think we have highlighted some of the challenges. I think you did a really eloquent job in doing that. And now I want to move on to the so what. So what do we do about this? One of the comments coming through is around women and their participation on boards, for example, where other women, where women have kind of ganged up against a particular woman, on a board who might not kind of fit the profile of belonging for whatever reason, or if there's any other kinds of marginalization that happens once you reach that level. What is an impactful way of holding that accountable? Or is it just something you end up fighting all on your own? And maybe I can give that to Basani and to Natalie to deal with. And then I'll widen up the questions to some of the other participants around how we can begin to amplify our access to agency. Basani, you kick off first. I mean, if you are being targeted in the boardroom, I mean, what's the best way to put your gloves on and fight back?
Yeah. I must tell you that really, it rings true for me. It's a very difficult thing to do. I can't remember who earlier said, if you speak up, then you are aggressive. If you don't speak up, then, you're timid, and you're constantly stuck between these two ideals. And because there's no rule book, you're making it up as you go along. So I think maybe the first thing is be very kind to yourself, because you're going to get it wrong a lot. And I'm still getting it wrong, to be perfectly frank. But I think the thing that I took a view on is, one, I have to take the long view. You know, if I'm going to get a boardroom full of people who've never seen a Black female leader who also happens to be young, I need to figure out how to bring them along with me, how to build that trust. And I've been very pleased to see that, after a year of doing this, I'm getting much more comfortable in being able to speak my truth. Whereas, 2 years ago, it would never have been a privilege for me to speak my truth because the level of trust just wasn't there. The level of credibility wasn't there. But now that I have developed that with a lot of people on my board, it's a lot easier to say, guys, this is not acceptable. And we can disagree on it. But absolutely, the key is to figure out how do you, firstly, have the credibility. Secondly, build the relationships with people on that board. Because they must be able to see things from your side. So you must actually make the time to spend time with different board members, start to understand where they are coming from, start to understand what their fears and concerns are, and then figure out how you're going to get them to follow you, to understand.
It sounds like so much work, Basani, and
a lot of work, yeah.
You have no idea.
I ask whether you go to the bar and the rugby as well.
No, I definitely do not do any of those things. No, but somebody said to me, it's all about becoming the bigger person. I've been hearing that since 2005. I'm so exhausted of being the bigger person. I'm so exhausted of having to be the one who raises these issues, the one who consistently has to work so hard. It is tiring, Yes. But at the same time, I don't know how else you do it. I don't know how else you build the credibility and the ability to stand up for yourself if you don't make the time to build these relationships.
Natalie?
Yeah, I think Basani's right. 20% of the work is definitely relationship building, and your credibility counts a lot. If you're consistent in your dealings with, let's say, your board members or the organization, people would start understanding that, look, we can expect that this will come out of her mouth, or this is how she will think. I mean, working in governance, compliance, and risk, I think I'm already being placed in a box that I'm going to look for the things that are not correct or right. And then when I speak from a knowledge base or fact base. I never make things personal. I always try and look at what is it that is in the best interest of the organization, and more so the employees, because we are at the behest of the employees, not even the organization. So my take on it is, yes, you have to build relationships with everybody that is an influencer on that board. In my case, my fellow board members on the different panels that I sit on. And I would also know that if I had to contact someone on the board and say, listen, I'm having difficulty with getting through to certain people on certain things, what is your take on it? And of course, most of the times the males will say, but you are too forward, you are too forthright, you're shooting from the hip. But that's me. That is my personality. And I have at times toned down or stepped down, which is what Basani is saying. It's a lot of work and it's tiring. We as women, unfortunately, we don't have water holes. This is something I've also learned, that these men have water holes where they go to and they have their sessions. Maybe we need to start meeting also, outside of work and just a workshop, talk shop, whatever they do, because it's very easy for them to make deals and move on. And so I've learned throughout that you must have credibility in terms of what you are bringing to the table, because that is what would count at the end of the day. Unfortunately, Iman, it's a lot of work, and I don't know why it has to be this way, because in other instances, it's very easy for a male counterpart just to talk things and things get done. It is what it is, but we are not going to stop here. We're going to start breaking down those barriers. We're going to break down those walls, and we're going to force, because we have women coming after us that needs to see our footprints.
Well, here's the thing, and here's where I think it is important for our objective is to find what is it in our practical lives then that begins to hold an unfair practice accountable, but also begins to shift the needle on women's participation and giving us that greater access to decision making. So, and Mersha, maybe I can put this one to you from Polarity Consulting, and this is why Nicholas's question. Many of our mothers and sisters spent the prime of their lives living in apartheid South Africa, deprived of economic participation. They must be 60 plus by now. How do we allow them the dice to enter the economy, creating funding opportunities, having them access skills? A lot of these, women who don't fit into the funding bracket, or their organizations that don't fit into the funding brackets. What opportunities lie for those who want to still participate in this economy, Mersha?
So I think I want to tackle, say a little on your earlier question, because it's also a broader question of how we lead. And so I think and it's a question that's very related also to questions of our sensitivity. How do we read the room? How do we understand who we're engaging with? And sometimes I've, in the past, been quite, I don't have to read the room. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say what I should say. It's not always the correct way, and that's also how you learn. Some of these ways, the path you choose also teaches you important lessons. And I think it's some lessons we can all share. But I think we have a situation in South Africa where the contribution that ordinary women make, poor women make, in the rural areas, in the villages, where their contribution to the economy is as invisible as their voice. In fact, many of them are in the informal settlement. Many of them, with their little plot, is feeding a household. With their little trolley selling fat cook or whatever it is that they're selling, is keeping a child in school. That level of contribution that's put me through school, and put me through the university, is not recognized. And there isn't facilities in our government's thinking of how do we give women access to build the little initiative that they have to a greater initiative. I'm pleased Basani is here because I can talk to her indirectly through this Zoom meeting. Women will say, I live in a village, I have user rights on my land. I cannot develop my land because I cannot get access to a loan from the bank. I can't develop my little spaza because nobody's going to give me money. So there's multiple obstacles that poor women have to cross to be able to continue to build their livelihoods. In this country, the land question is another such important issue. Women don't have access to land in their own rights. It's something that should be challenged. We don't have many things. And so I think we need to begin to not only see women without voice and without decision making, but also that economic means is denied ordinary women. Poor women struggle. And this, I think, is at the hub of this deep economic crisis that we have in the country. But many, many women are unemployed. So I think this is an issue.
Well, here's the thing, and here's the beauty of the way these webinars are working. A lot of the themes that we have identified as headline issues are very definitely interconnected. Our next webinar on the 18th talks specifically around funding. Here's a comment from Anonymous who says, as a professional woman working in one of the most rural and remote areas, we always see these nice speeches. How do women access the funds when one tries to apply? The forms are so long. Rural women are always excluded, especially in accessing funds. Marketing of products is a problem. I'd like to see the practical aspect of nice speeches. And I think for Anonymous, I would love for you to join our panel next week because it targets that question exactly. But if any of you have a comment in this, you're welcome to share. However, I want to turn the lens to Lynette and Lebo now as we begin to move into some of the action steps. I mean, it's gonna, as I say, dovetail between some of the topics, but I don't want to leave action for the last, and then we have very little time, because I think it needs to take up the majority of our time in this discussion this morning. From your perspective, where do the options lie for us to deal with what is almost a spray gun of areas where there are problems? So you have problems in the boardroom just with regard to the way the current culture of the boardroom is. You have problems in our rural communities where women, might have access to land but can't access funding. Or we have these insidious cultural and patriarchal norms that keep women invisible and in the background. I mean, it's just so many areas to target. As a strategy, where would you say, Lynette, should be our first point of action?
Thanks, Iman. Yeah, this is a very interesting discussion. Actually, I was, what Natalie mentioned, this water holes, I think women need to start to have their own water holes. We need to also start to have, in golf, we've got what we've called the 9th hole. So even when you get women that plays golf, immediately after golf, they have to rush home because there's other responsibilities that one has to deal with. And so what I often find is that, there's very little women that participate at board level. And then you find that those that participate at board level, they are peddling so much that they don't even have time just to go and look for, just to go and have a strategy within their water holes and just to find out what can be done. So I often think that, for me, if we bring the girl child from home, I think culture begins at home. So that, at home level, our girl child must understand that there is nothing wrong. You are allowed to have to play golf and after golf and spend your 9th hole and don't feel guilty. And there is something called water hole where you must meet with other sisters and where you can discuss, because I often cry that, in our industry, you've got this brotherhood, but we don't have a proper sisterhood because all the sisters need to go back home and take care of the kids. And then those that are sitting that have got exposure in positions, what normally happens is that my grandmother told me that, when a lion wants to attack you, it will chase you and isolate you from the crowd until you find yourself alone. And then you are so tired by the time it attacks you, because you've been running and pedaling so much, you are so tired to even have a voice, or even just to say, let me go and let me go to the water hole and just to have water. You are so exhausted. So if we have that in a culture, even at school level, it would be nicer to start introducing to the girl child that it's fine, it's okay, it's not a crime to have a water hole. And then making that strategy, we can then take it back to the rural areas, because I always also feel so much for the women that don't have a voice. That is why I always say it's nicer, corporates, it's very nice, but everybody that participates in corporate or that comes into urban areas, they've got a relative in the rural areas. So, but once we have these water holes, it will help that, the girl child will have a strategy to say, how do we then help our mamas or gogos that don't have a voice in the rural areas?
Yeah, I think the heart and soul of what you're saying, Lynette, for people who might not like golf, or who might not want to hang out, in places where men typically hang out, or whatever, or create a new space. I think the heart and soul of what you're saying is that there needs to be more women's solidarity, a stronger network. Something that I really feel quite passionately about is collaborating with other women cross-sectorally to make sure that when each one kind of bring one scenario. Lebo, how do you feel about what Lynette is saying? And then, from a practical perspective, how do we begin to, as we revise our own strategies behaviorally, what exists on paper to make sure that, it's not just that we need to have a behavioral kind of shift, but that there are things, and laws and policies that exist to ensure that women do participate and participate fairly and their voices are heard in decision making?
Iman, thanks for the question. Lynette have really covered a lot of strong points and things that we really need to change. When it comes to the law, there are a lot of quotas that have made possible for women to participate. I think we are very good in writing the laws and coming up with the policies. However, when it comes to implementation, that's where we lose the whole story. I would say let's stop with tokenism. If you employ a woman to be in a position of power, be inclusive and supportive to that woman so that she could be successful. Do not sideline any woman in any businesses. So if a woman is present, try by all means to be inclusive. Corporate world needs to be inclusive and supportive to the woman. Another point is the lack of voice. From the video that you showed when we started, we are seeing that the number of women are really dropping. Women are leaving. Women are tired of trying to comply, trying to please, trying to belong. We see that women are leaving, or women, they will end up moving or changing jobs a lot, so that there are certain people that they really cannot stand this. I would like to say on that point, don't just pack up and go or resign. Share your story and shame the organization. Share your story with other women so that they can learn. Somebody will be able to pick up a wise wage on how to survive a very difficult environment. Another point is women in roles, all the female that are in a high position. May we please make the circle bigger? Can we please create and invite other women? There are some women that they still want to be the only women in the field, the only first women. Can we be inclusive? Can we support another women? Can we share with them the difficulties? Cannot we just share that, yes, I'm successful, I've been in an executive role, I've been in what position. It is nice, we make decisions, we strategize, but also share the challenges with the solution. Try to have an informal education to other women. That's what I do in my informal space. Another thing that I always say to other women, be authentic. Do not let anyone, don't be bullied in an organization. Another sad part when it comes to the law and the policies and the quotas is that we need to stop making policies flexible. Once the policy is written, can the policy be adhered to and implemented as it's written? The minute we start diverging, or we say this industry or this function can view this policy as it seems to them, that's where we are opening an opportunity for people to continue not listening to women, for people to continue oppressing women. Thanks.
Thanks, Lebo. Basani, I was looking at a picture of you just the other day where you were profiled. I think it might have been in a Women's Month article, or it might have been for something else. But what I noticed were the women that were encircling you in your executive position as a support, as a support to your executive functions, and they were made up of women. So that for me was quite heartening. Although we want to believe that wherever women are present with other women, that there is a strengthening of their own voice in terms of their leadership and the competencies that they bring to that role. So that's just a comment from me. But let's bring you a question, Basani, from Shemaine, who's saying, thank you to all the panelists. What do you think of the president's 40% quota? Now, you'll recall the president said that one of the first actions in terms of activating women's access to greater economic participation was setting aside 40% of public procurement for women-owned businesses. And Charmaine is asking for the panelists' thoughts, and I'm asking you for yours on this.
Sure, Charmaine. I live in a space where I have very little expectation that anything that's said by government will actually be done. I think the government has proved itself to be wonderful in terms of coming up with new policies, but very, very light on actual delivery. So I really believe the only way that women are going to get their fair share of the economy is if there's grassroots mobilization, that, you know, companies must make a concerted effort to involve women. I think relying on the state, it doesn't work. And also it's hard to police these things, right? Who's gonna sit and say, yes, 40% went there or didn't go there, and at which point do we say we've been successful? I'm very saddened by the fact that, you know, we're having these same conversations that I feel like we were having 10 years ago. And it's exactly the same thing. So little has changed. And I think tragically, there isn't very much that is obvious. There's no silver bullet to fixing this. But two things for me come to mind. The first is that idea that education is the biggest contraceptive that there is. That when you educate women, they start to make better decisions. And the second thing I wanted to say is that idea about how when you educate a girl child, you educate a village. Now, if we can figure out how we educate ourselves and other women, I really think that's the best way for us to overcome this place where we're at.
You know, I share the kind of cynicism that you share about having, you know, similar to you and similar to everyone on the panel, I suppose, and a lot of people listening. And I get the sense from some of the questions as well that we are having this, we listen to the same kinds of promises being made. And so something needs to shift. And I think that's really the objective of WoSA this Women's Month, where women are saying, you know, we're tired, as I said in the introduction, of platitudes and promises. How do we make change and shifting the needle a reality for us? Some of you have touched on funding. Mersha, in the beginning, you also spoke about access to funding, you know, for example, you know, having an access to a loan from a bank. And what I want each of you to think about is, how do we activate what exists, particularly in law or provisions that already exist, or making sure that government makes good on promises already made, or that we activate, you know, those that are meant to monitor the allocations to women. What are the practical things that we can take out of our conversation today, besides the fact that we're going to need, you know, maybe a shift in strategy in terms of how we behave, how we collaborate, and how we network amongst each other? Because I want people who are listening to feel like there is something that they can do after this that is not as much about behavioral change, but is a reliance on a provision that exists that needs to be activated on, that needs to be held accountable. And maybe, Mersha, I can ask you to pick up the baton on that point, and I'm sure you have some very good ideas on how you know, there are things that we can actually do to change our situation.
So thank you. Basani makes quite an important point that I agree with, and it's about education. I also think that we need to look at education a lot more in terms of its practicalities, because we have an education that, and perhaps Natalie can speak to this a lot more, or Lynette, but our education is often very theoretical, and it's not often rooted in assisting people who are not going to go to university or not becoming an engineer or an accountant or whatever, but with practical skills of entrepreneurial skills, of artisanal skills, etc. These are often part of what can create, give women access to the world of economy. If you're a plumber, you can have your own initiative, you can have your own little plumbing enterprise, etc., and so on. So I think the whole question of technical education is one of the areas that require quite a lot of attention. The second one, I think, is about structural change. We need to ask questions about how do we get to a place where we can decentralized, a very centralized economy. Our economy is extremely centralized. We have, if I take retail or the food sector, how many supermarket groups control retail? Whereas if we have an unbundling of this, then it does mean that we're opening the economic space for women's groups to organize themselves, to set up a retail or a distributing group, etc. So I think there's a lot of rethinking of the structural obstacles to the economy that has to change. Access to local markets. We're the only country in the region where there are no local fresh food fruit markets. Today, where there are these fresh fruit markets, it's controlled by I don't want to bring in the question of race as well into this conversation, but it's yuppified. It's yuppified, and the local market is being now driven by some young white people selling the goods that is grown in the schoolyards in Kailicha, and it's organic, etc. So all of these things need to change. It's not simply giving women 40% access to anything. We need a whole rethink of what this means. Why are we buying chickens, for example, and importing chickens from Brazil? Goodness. Do you know how many road runners exist in our villages? We can make chickens, grow chickens. I don't need to have Brazil's chickens. So a lot of these structural things are the obstacles to this economy failing. And that's where I think we need to start as well.
Love that.
I can carry on with this thing for long, so sorry.
I know, Mersha, but I feel the passion around why, because when you have a ready solution, it feels so frustrating to know that this problem can be quickly short-circuited, but we're just not doing it. I remember, the community that I grew up in, we used to call them the foul uncles. They would come pop, pop, pop on a Saturday morning with the bucket full of chickens. I didn't approve of the way the chickens were being kept, mind you, but there were local farmers who were doing their thing, and I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that. Let me come to you, Natalie, for things that are actionable in terms of making sure that women have greater access to decision-making from an economic perspective.
Iman, one of the things that I think works for me and should work for most women, ladies, girls, accessibility. So if you just look at this platform, I frown upon sometimes that when you phone someone and you ask, can I have Mersha's number? Then the next person would say, no, but Mersha wants to know what it's about and all that. I remember contacting you years back, and it was so easy to get your number, and we started working on a few projects. You were not being a gatekeeper or keeping your number private or access to people that were on your platform. So the first thing is we need to become accessible. If you cannot assist someone with information, let's say someone wants to invest in African Bank, I might be able to say, Basani, I'm going to pass on your number to someone. Can they access you? If Basani says, look, I can't help the person, identify who can, So that's the type of women we should become, that we make what we have. It's like sowing your seeds and extending that to other people, to other women. And I also want to say in this platform to people and the men listening in, please, we are not men haters, because we do have colleagues and male counterparts that are very, very good, and they are on this fight with us. So I just want to say, we want to work with everybody that can assist us. So a few years ago, I shared some very interesting concepts, being in the construction space with very senior people in government. And I want to say to Basani, you spot on when you say, yeah, good luck with that 40%, because we experience it. We are the ones that are saying, when the policy comes to the organization or the organizations that we serve on as a board member or a seasoned board member, we would want women to participate. then you get the backlash or the resistance from within the organization. Remember, we are not always within the organization. So they'll come up, no, the price is not right. Sometimes I read something the other day where a lady said, where am I supposed to get 5 references? I'm only starting my business. Where must I now go and prove that I've done X, Y, and Z? But I've worked in the industry, I've delivered, I've participated. Why can't I get a reference letter that says, yes, I've been part of the system? But now they want actual reference letters that said, you built a school, or you did this, or you did something. So these are the barriers that come to us, and we now have to make decisions as to how do we help women participate. Another interesting thing, for example, in the African bank situation, I had a discussion with a very senior politician. I said, why don't you go to African bank, seeing that you can't deliver and you can't build schools? Go to African bank and say, how many people do you employ? 500. Build the houses for the 500 employees and get a tax break or tax relief from that. But no, it seems like we need to control everything we do in the space, or everything in terms of our structural setup. And I just want to give a last example. I was talking to a counterpart because we've done so many study tours. Remember, we're now all being educated, re-educated, redeveloped. And I found myself in another country where in South Korea, they've actually moved the public works department from Seoul, Korea to Dijon. And I was asking myself, to extend the level of employment, why do we need to have all the government departments in Pretoria, wherever they are? Why can't we say Home Affairs, go to the Western Cape, the actual Home Affairs? In that way, we spread employment if people can't be economically active as in having their own businesses. Because not everybody wants to run a business. You know, it's tough. It is tough, right? But for those that want to be gainfully employed, why do we need to have everything in Gauteng like we want to run everything from the center or the epicenter? We need to engage government to say there are other things in other countries that work. And let me not get onto modular housing, where the modular house is already built, set up, and all you do, you put the house on a truck and go and deliver the modular house, instead of what we saw on TV the other day, these shacks, COVID shacks that were built. So we know what we can contribute. We know what we want to provide. But I myself, being the person that I am, I don't even know where to go with these ideas. And then you have a commission that is also now infrastructure commission, and we told that 300 plans were submitted, only 38 made the cut list and they were gazetted. How are women going to access all these infrastructure projects? It's ridiculous. Sorry, that's my space, so I can only talk about what I know.
But I just think for all of us, we have such vast and historical experiences in this area that we can, you need a whole lot of time to listen to each of these experiences, because they exist almost in every sector of our society. And I would say that, my own election of a task force for a turnaround would certainly comprise of you fine ladies. Let me share a few more comments, and then I'm going to turn it to Lynette Lebo and Basani maybe for some closing comments and some practical advice for some of the women that we profiled in the testimonials. I mean, we're talking about some of the already developed spaces in the boardrooms of our country, in the banking institutions. But when, you're starting out in your job and you're being undermined in middle management or lower management, if your confidence is being undermined and you have to go to hospital and get medication because, you are so soul destroyed from the beginning of your career, I want you to please speak to those women who are sharing that similar experience, whether they live in rural or urban communities. Before I do that and hand to Lynette and Lebo, I just want to share some more thoughts that are coming from the chat. Anonymous says, South Africa imports a lot of goods from China. Why are we not talking about creating women industrialists? In this way, we will create more jobs. And I think you heard Mersha lay out quite eloquently how we can activate what already exists in terms of connecting women to economic opportunity by widening up the market space. Joan Marie Fubbs, your comment was quite long, but also quite, I think, quite powerful and to the point. from Ingrid as well. Please comment on the statement in view that all efforts must be focused on COVID and other crises such as women's abuse must give way to our focus on addressing COVID-19. What we are doing, this to me simply exacerbates both crises, as women are playing a support role in addressing these crises and are under even greater pressure. Women can offer constructive solutions to crises because they operate more effectively than men. And the great thing about what you just said there, Ingrid, is that we have the studies to back that up, that women are better at problem solving in a number of different areas, yet they are often overlooked in favor of men for similar positions where those skills would be really beneficial to the organization. And this is to Lynette's point, actually. Nompumelelo says, I quite agree with the concept of the water hole for refreshing. There is a necessity to collaborate and enable each other as professionals and executives. In my organization, we've been talking about a women's forum, but the objective is based on mentorship and empowerment. I am quite contrary to the objective, as I believe executives also need a waterhole to recharge, and that was the basis for forming a women's organization. Love the ideas. Anonymous says, good morning, ladies. I'm happy to be part of the webinar. My question is, how do you deal with the issue of a man putting a woman in a position putting a man in the position that a woman should be put into, just to block her and to block capable and outspoken women. That's from Matlakeng, from Middleburg in Mpumalanga. You can make a note of that and maybe add it into your comments, Lynette Lebo and Basani. And then Bongani says, I'm a spiritual physiologist, and one of the key factors in my practice is addressing early childhood trauma. Our discussions around gender imbalance are somehow zoomed into corporate functions. It is deeper than just the males you meet in the boardroom. Males have no identity. They have lacked that in terms of not being properly mentored. They use education as an escape to rebrand themselves. And now when women want equality, they end up being territorial. Now the women end up being a threat. It's deeper than that, and we need further discussion on this. And I think, like I said at the beginning, to Bongani's point, in all of these discussions, we take ourselves to our roles, and we are encoded with our history, our experiences, what our parents have taught us, where we grew up. In some ways that can empower us, but in some ways it can also debilitate us. Lynette Magasa, some firefighting tips from you as to how we can activate our access to greater decision-making in this economy.
Thanks, Iman. I think, you know, education is key. But for me, I'm thinking it has to be more practical. You know, I'm looking at maybe, let's say, from forming of cooperatives. Cooperatives, you can have cooperatives in the rural areas, you can have cooperatives in urban areas, you can have smaller cooperatives for young girls that come in that has to just join maybe someone that is selling articles so that they know where to vent and how to vent, especially when they encounter challenges. And I could not agree more with Natalie to say that it's also very important for all the other women, the bigger sisters that has been there, to be available. You know, if it can become our culture that if anyone asks for my number, even if you cannot assist that person, but at least the little that you can do, you can refer them to someone else. And in that way, I think it will help so that, because when the young ones enter into a corporate world, and if you feel that you are drowning, you should be able to ask for anyone, and if you can have one-on-one, if I can't assist, but I will be able to refer you to someone else where you can have enough confidence to say, you know, to vent or to voice out your challenges. Thank you.
This level with specific reference to some of those women that you had profiled in the beginning who shared really compelling stories, some of whom were, you know, kind of undermined right at the very start of their careers, like Ulu.
Okay, it's really sad, honestly, when one feels insulted, when one is depressed, when one doesn't feel welcomed. I would like to say to support outside, you first start internally with your human resources. Human resources are the custodian of policies, and they are the custodian of good working climate, and they need to ensure that the employees are supported and taken care of as always. Nowadays there are also a lot of employee wellness programs. We might have a wellness inside the organization, and there's an extension of wellness externally where you speak to a neutral person as well. So by going to those supports, start internally, go through your wellness, go to your external wellness. And again, if you're not finding solutions or people are sweeping your issues under the carpet, find a way of escalations. There's a grievance measure. Every organization has a grievance procedure on how to log in a grievance, where you sit in with all those parties and you discuss the issues. At times, people are driven by their stereotypes and they are not even aware of what they are doing to employees. And if that fails, there's still another level of help. That's a labor lawyer. Have a conversation with a labor lawyer. We find that there are a lot of free legal advices, or the free of a cheaper policies, or some financial institution, they will even offer you a free advice. Speak to someone who is very specialized in the field and then lay out your issues. Show that what have you tried to intervene to solve the problem. I'm definitely sure that you will get the answer to solve the matter. We should not be employing people and to send them to psychiatric court, of which it's a pity that in the past 5 years, the number of depression has escalated, and especially depression that comes from the working environment. It is just not on. It's a disappointing. Then in terms of the overall picture or solution to other women issues, I would say the government needs to look into the women ministry. We need a women ministry that will focus in all aspects. We need a women ministry that has people that are experienced, competent, people that understand the social and the economic of where women are, depending on the level or the LSM of where you are in your life, from rural to urban, and a women in a ministry that have a strategy, and a strategy to change the lives of women, a strategy to enforce the policies that are already there, and a strategy to ensure that they better the women's life. Thank you.
We don't talk about the women's ministry often. I mean, would you say, having made that call, that does not exist right now, Sislebo?
I don't feel a lot of activity. I feel that they are reactive in most of the issues, and there's a lot more work that can be done under this women ministry. This women's ministry can be grown to so that it can cover social, it can cover economic, it can cover also the development of women. They can start from early childhood and then they go throughout the lifespan of a woman. There are a lot of issues that can be solved and dribbled. And my personal view is that I think they lack the capacity, they lack the competency, and they lack the skills. I think it's about time that we have the right people with the right skills that can work in that ministry and offer solutions. I think in this webinar, we all have solutions. Given a chance, we can give them or guide them to what they need to do. And we cannot have a women ministry that drives the interest of their politics. We cannot have a women ministry that still comply to patriarchy. Can we have a proper women ministry that will address the real issues of women challenges?
Let me share before I hand the mic to Basani from WSG webinar. We must distinguish between quality and quantity of women in leadership in South Africa. We have women who occupy powerful positions, but we don't know what their conviction is. Mamora also adds, how do we participate, especially in local governments, as the unemployment levels are still so high? We have women leading in departments, but they ignore us when we knock on doors. We have mine who are asked to enroll for PhD studies, but no funding is provided for them. In our university at WIT, so many foreign male lecturers. When are we even going to employ women lecturers? I don't know the stats on that, but I think it kind of leads to, just some of the other issues that people are facing where they are, restrictions in places where women are gatekeepers. So it's not necessarily always a given that if a woman is in a position of authority and is a key holder, that door suddenly disappears for everyone else. And that's an interesting discussion to have around that kind of pathology in women who persist in those kind of career-limiting behaviors. But let me turn it to you, Basani, and talk to some of the practical solutions, to accelerate the rates of promotion of women to decision-making roles. I mean, do we have to, again, look at things like mandatory gender quotas?
So Iman, I want to deal with two different questions. So I think the first one was in response to the clips that you showed us earlier, and then I'll deal with the second one after that. So, in my career, in my first job, I was so abused. I mean, I would work very long hours, get home in time to take a shower, go back to work. That was the kind of thing I was doing. My boss was aggressive, he was rude, and I got into a horrible depression as a result of it. Then in a subsequent job, I was a token, right? So I had this wonderful title and it was great, and I had all these expectations of what I would do, but then I was excluded from meetings, and I just was consistently humiliated. I remember chairing a meeting at some point, and at the end of the meeting, one of the guys comes up to me and says, Basani, I don't think women should speak in meetings because your voices are too squeaky. Now, this was just an ongoing, rally of just abuse and humiliation, right? And then, of course, I got into another depression after that. And even now, in my current job, there is no shortage of men who want to put you in your place. No shortage, and no shortage of women either. So you always face a lot of adversity. It's inevitable. And I think the big lesson for me has again been where Iman started with my questioning, is having people in your life who can say, look, this isn't going well, you need to resign. Or to say, look, this isn't going well, your self-esteem is taking a serious knock, change something. You need those people, or those people who will just listen to you and let you cry so you can wake up in the morning stronger to fight the fight again. But I think what it comes down to is you got to build the resilience, you got to build the networks, you got to build the strength to get through this, because it's never going to go away. I don't think, well, in my lifetime, maybe later. And then your second question about, are women gatekeepers? I was listening to Natalie earlier, Angela Nate saying, we must give our phone numbers out to people. I have a lot of people who call me. And I'm not so keen on giving out phone numbers. I have a lot of people who send me emails about how they want to become board members, and and their total experience is like a matric. So there's so many things that you deal with as you ascend in your power, let me call it that, right? Or in your career. There's just so many things, and so many things you're trying to balance out. So it isn't necessarily that you're saying no to this person because you're just being mean and you're trying to be a gatekeeper. Sometimes it's because you're trying to balance so many other things that nobody else knows about, right? You're fighting so many fights that are your own fights, that you don't have the space to do everything that looks like it's the right things. And you need the time, right? So I spoke earlier about the time to build the credibility you need to build so you can make different decisions, so you can actually change things. And so it's just not, it isn't as simple as saying, once you have the title, you can now start dismantling the patriarchy. You actually can't. That the patriarchy rules my life. I actually can't tell you how much it rules my life. It does. And breaking down patriarchy, we all know. We've been all trying to break down the patriarchy, I'm just since we're little girls. It's hard work. So I have small victories on an ongoing basis, and I hope that once, I reach the end of my career, I can look back and say, all those small victories over, 40 years have created this. But certainly it takes time, and I'm confident that we will break down the patriarchy, but it's just not going to be one person doing it alone. And it's not going to be over a short period of time. It's going to take a long time.
I think, well, listen, first of all, thank you to each of you for just speaking so personally. And what I love about these discussions, and I hate at the same time, is that it does get you, but when you're an hour into the conversation, that's when the real stuff starts to come out. And now I want to start the conversation all over again, because it's such a stark difference, Basani, to the way that you started out, which is the front cover of the JSE magazine sort of, speech kind of way I've been well supported and everything is great. And then as we go along, we're allowing ourselves to be a little more vulnerable to this conversation, this process, with the objective of helping other people see their own vulnerabilities and lessons through your story. And I think part of what you're saying in limiting how many people can have access to you is to do with self-care. And I think for a lot of people who are in a public role or are very needed in society for something or the other, there can be a kind of need fatigue in being so available to other people. So I completely get the point around needing to guard yourself and exercising some self-care. But when you talk about there being no shortage of men and women who want to put you in your place, and how, these are still struggles that you're waging as a very self-evolved woman, as are all of you on this panel. I mean, then we get to see just how tough it still is out there every day, and it's like going to war. I want to share another comment, which might segue quite nicely into you, Marsha. We've got about 10 minutes on the clock. And so it's really nice to be able to put some of these questions to each of you. Kafiwe Bopapi says, how do we bring the conversation of customary law into the conversation without offending the elderly in the name of culture? One speaker mentioned, and I think it was you, Marsha, that women perpetuate the social constraints that infringe them and limit their participation, both from a social and economic perspective. How do we redefine a girl child who needs to find her identity as a woman, as a mother, a wife, and CEO? Empowering a young woman is important, but we see a conflict when we begin to have this discussion with the older generation. And I'm going to start with Marsha, but if anyone else wants to throw a lovely meaty bone into the stew pot, you're more than welcome to do so. Marsha.
I was muted. So it's a complex conversation because up until recently, if you're a so-called colored woman, talking about customary law and so on was not, I didn't have enough experience. But in the last, I was a bit shy, but in the last period, as there's imposition of, and it's something we fought quite a lot last year, the traditional Khoisan and leadership, it's now an act. This was an act that government introduced, and it was a way of saying that all of a sudden, those of us who grew up in a particular community, you would also have to live. So Imam and Natalie, we're all part of one or other Khoisan community now, with a chief and a headman and so on. Self-imposed, self-elected. And this is part of the problem of traditional authority, because there's a culture, there is a set of norms that protect this, this section or this part of our lives. And as women, we know that a large part of the patriarchy that we experience, the silences, the ways in which our fathers, our brothers, and our communities act, comes from this. Yet it's almost, nobody wants to challenge traditional authority. Nobody wants to say that in the traditional council, women don't have a voice. In the traditional leadership, there are very few women. Who chose them? Who holds them accountable? All these are critical questions, but we're too afraid to raise the questions around them. And perhaps this, I think, is part of what we need to deal with, because this is at the root of some of the problems that all of us sit with today. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Marsha. Ivy Maboko says, I agree to the point that Lebo was making. The women's ministry is not effective. What can we do to change their mandate? And so many other comments that I wasn't able to get through to all of you as we begin to wrap this conversation, just to let everybody know that we do have 2 more webinars planned, one on the 18th and the 25th. The 18th deals with what this conversation leads to is economic empowerment vis-a-vis funding and some of the obstacles that exist in that arena. which can really activate some of the suggestions that we heard from the ladies today. And our final panel is around legislation that really activates women and opens them up to their own authority, particularly when it comes to economic participation. But just as we leave this, I mean, I don't know if anyone has, and I hate the cliche, but the burning comment that they really want to make. We've seen, you know, that we need to educate ourselves better. We need to be smarter in this economy. We need to fire up the connective tissue that places women and approximates them near to markets for their products. And we need to see a lot more productivity for women across the spectrum in our country. And there are already laws and a basket of laws that make that possible to happen. But what else would you say is something, and maybe just one comment on this, what else would you say is one of the key areas that we can go about fully realizing our ability to make decisions in the spaces in which we occupy? Just a vigorous, you know, even just a little, okay, Nancy, I'll give that final word to you. You have to activate your microphone, I think, Natalie.
Sorry about that. I was saying that I'm a friend of newspapers. So a lot of times we find that things are placed in newspapers. And many years ago when I grew up, I don't know how true this is, but I'm going to quote it anyway, that there was a saying that if you want to hide anything from a black person, put it in a book or in a newspaper. So my philosophy has always been, if I need to find information, if I need to get things, I must be a reader. So I read a lot of books and I find a lot of information from books, particularly newspapers. So a lot of times there are projects advertised, there are funds advertised. I'm not saying this is the one-stop go only, but that has been my resource, and it's a good resource. We must read and we must find information from such sources. If the statement is true, yes, things are being hidden in books, in computers and stuff. So we need to get access to those sources of information. So I want to leave this panel with saying that we must become readers. We must empower ourselves with not PhDs and all those other things, but become knowledgeable in what is going on in your space. If you want to run an NGO, understand the business of running an NGO. So, you know, that's basic things that I've picked up in my career. You know, you got to be in the know-how. Thank you. That's basically all I have to say.
Before I bring our discussion to an official close today, I want to quickly hand back to Doric, who, as I introduced her to you earlier, speaks on behalf of WoSA. Doric?
Thank you so much, Iman. I just wanted to highlight one key thing and to really say to all the women out there, we need to start a revolution that speaks to an awakening. We need to wake up to the fact that there's stuff that is happening that is not right. And you cannot change something that you're not aware of. And we're talking about the girl child. We should have initiatives that speak to enlightening the young girls about authenticity. What does it mean to know who you are? Because if we wait until someone becomes a woman, and then we're going backwards and we're saying, look, you need to be confident, things that Labour was speaking about, you know, authenticity, don't allow the environment to change who you are. Let's start when these girls are still young, let them understand who they are. And then later, when we come together and unite towards one cause, we all have an understanding about what we're faced with. So I just wanted to say, let's start an awakening revolution. Let's wake up to the fact that there are things that need to change, and let's not allow all of this to change who we are as women. And this is why we're doing what we're doing. We want women to be able to become themselves and be free to express themselves freely without aligning themselves to a particular personality in the boardroom. We need to be able to have that access. Thank you.
Powerfully said, Doric, and I think it then gives me permission to say that a lot of times when we judge people, especially women, for not doing this or that or making assumptions about them being involved in this cause or that, it could simply be the fact that somebody hasn't, you know, shared a piece of information that could alter their mindset, open their consciousness, or awaken their, you know, their position, as Doric is saying. So the importance, I think, of today is to spread the word far and wide wherever you are. There are a lot of ideas and I think a lot of practical things that we can take out of what we heard from each of our panelists today. Some of them are behavioral, some of them are practical in terms of what actions we can embark on. But altogether, what it converges to is towards making sure that we can achieve this objective of making sure that women are at the center of our economy. For more information, please log on to www.womenofsouthafrica.org. Thank you to each participant. I can't believe we had such an amazing panel of women today. Basani to you, Mersha, Natalie, Leopold, Lynette, Dorif, you are all amazing, and I'm honored to be in your company today. Thank you very much for your time, and don't forget to join us next week, same time, on the WoSA platform for a conversation around funding. Looking forward to seeing you then. Don't forget to sign the petition. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Iman.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.